England, 1802. A hush fell over the east corner of Whitehall Manor's grand ballroom as the Duke of Westfield entered, his mere presence commanding attention without effort. Lady Cecilia Clarendon observed him from behind her painted fan. This man who had become the subject of every matchmaking mother's ambition in London. Unlike the other young ladies who fluttered and preened, Cecilia remained still, a portrait of quiet dignity despite the nervous flutter in her chest. She stood beside her father, Count Henry Clarendon, a gentleman whose noble lineage far outweighed his modest coffers, the weight of their family's future pressing invisibly upon her shoulders. "Remember your duty, daughter," her father whispered, his voice barely audible above the string quartet. "The Duke of Westfield approaches." Cecilia's heart thundered against her ribs as Edmund Carlisle, the formidable Duke of Westfield, cut through the crowd with purposeful strides. At 32, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that caused conversations to halt and heads to turn. Tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing hazel eyes and dark chestnut hair, he was as intimidating as he was handsome. "Count Clarendon," the Duke acknowledged with a curt nod before turning his assessment to Cecilia. "Lady Cecilia." His gaze swept over her with cool detachment, as though appraising horseflesh at auction. Cecilia straightened her spine, determined not to wither under his scrutiny. "Your Grace," she curtsied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It is an honor." "Might I request a dance?" he asked, though it sounded more command than question. As they moved across the ballroom floor, Cecilia sensed the eyes of the ton upon them. The Duke's reputation preceded him, wealthy beyond measure, ruthlessly intelligent in business matters, and notoriously particular. At 32 he had remained unwed, despite countless attempts by ambitious mothers to secure his hand for their daughters. "I shall speak plainly, Lady Cecilia," Edmund said, as they executed a perfect turn. "I require a wife of suitable lineage and impeccable reputation. Your father has indicated your willingness to consider such an arrangement." Cecilia swallowed. "Indeed, Your Grace. You understand what this entails? I need an heir and a hostess. In return you shall want for nothing material." "And companionship, Your Grace?" she dared ask, her mother's romantic notions still fresh in her mind. Might that develop with time? Something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps, or amusement, before the mask of indifference returned. "I make no promises beyond what I've stated. If these terms are agreeable, we could announce our engagement next week." 2 months later, Cecilia stood in the Grand Cathedral, becoming the Duchess of Westfield in a ceremony attended by the cream of society. Her gown of ivory silk and Valenciennes lace drew gasps of admiration, but beneath its splendor, her heart trembled with uncertainty. Edmund recited his vows with the same efficiency he might dictate business terms. When he placed the wedding band upon her finger, a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds, his touch was impersonal, his expression unchanged. "With this ring, I thee wed," he pronounced, the words hanging hollow between them. Later, at the lavish reception at one of the Duke's smaller London properties, Cecilia found herself seated beside her new husband, as a parade of well-wishers offered congratulations. Edmund acknowledged each with perfect courtesy, but betrayed no warmth, even as he introduced his bride. "Your Grace," an elderly countess leaned forward to whisper to Cecilia, "you must be overjoyed to have captured the most eligible bachelor in England." Cecilia smiled politely. "Fortune has smiled upon me indeed." As twilight fell and the celebrations continued, Cecilia's mother drew her aside, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My darling, remember what I told you about marriage," Lady Eleanor Clarendon said, clasping her daughter's hands. "Patience bears the sweetest fruit. The Duke may seem distant now, but time and tenderness can soften the hardest heart." Cecilia nodded, clinging to this hope as she prepared to depart for Aldermere House, the Duke's ancestral home in the countryside. Perhaps, away from society's prying eyes, Edmund might reveal a different side of himself. But as their carriage rolled through the iron gates of the estate the following day, Edmund merely gestured to the imposing stone mansion before them. "Aldermere House has been in the Carlisle family for 6 generations, he stated, his tone more befitting a tour guide than a bridegroom. "Mrs. Fairchild, the housekeeper, will show you to your chambers and explain the running of the household. I have correspondence to attend to." And with that, He handed her down from the carriage and strode away, leaving Cecilia to face her new life alone. That night, as she sat at her dressing table while her lady's maid, Rose, brushed out her long auburn hair, Cecilia gazed at her reflection in the silvered glass. The Duchess of Westfield looked back at her, resplendent in a nightgown of finest silk, yet her eyes held a sadness that no title or luxury could disguise. "Will His Grace be joining you this evening, Your Grace?" Rose asked tentatively. Cecilia's cheeks flushed. I am uncertain. Perhaps." But Edmund did not come, nor did he come the following night, or the one after that. Their marriage remained unconsummated, as days stretched into weeks, and Cecilia realized that the Duke had meant exactly what he'd said. He required a wife in name only, a suitable ornament to complete his collection of perfection. By day, she explored Aldermere House, its 52 rooms filled with treasures from across the empire: Persian carpets, Italian marble statues, Chinese porcelain, and paintings by the greatest masters. At night, she dined alone. The Duke invariably engaged in business affairs that kept him secluded in his private study. One morning, a month after their wedding, Mrs. Fairchild approached her hesitantly as she breakfasted alone. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but the staff is wondering. That is to say, we are uncertain about your preferences regarding the household." Cecilia put down her teacup. "My preferences? The previous Duke, His Grace's father, had very particular ways, which His Grace has maintained. But as the new mistress of Aldermere—" The housekeeper trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Understanding dawned. The staff expected her to make changes, to put her mark upon the household, as was the right of any new lady of the manor. Yet Edmund had given her no authority, no guidance. Cecilia straightened her shoulders. "Mrs. Fairchild, I should like to tour the servants' quarters today, if you would be so kind as to show me." The housekeeper's eyes widened in surprise. "The servants' quarters, Your Grace?" "Indeed. I cannot properly oversee a household whose workings I do not understand, can I?" That afternoon, Cecilia was shocked by what she discovered. While the main house exuded opulence, the servants lived in cramped conditions with inadequate heating. The kitchen staff worked with outdated equipment, and the footmen shared beds in shifts. "Has it always been thus?" she asked Mrs. Fairchild. "The old Duke believed in economy below stairs, Your Grace," the housekeeper replied carefully. "And His Grace has been preoccupied with other matters." Cecilia nodded, her mind already working. "Please summon Mr. Wilson, the steward. I should like to review the household accounts." Over the next weeks, Cecilia quietly revolutionized life at Aldermere House. She reorganized the servants' quarters, ensuring each had decent accommodations. She modernized the kitchens, improved wages, and instituted regular half-days off for all staff. When Edmund questioned the increased expenditures during one of their rare shared meals, Cecilia met his gaze steadily. "The changes have improved efficiency, Your Grace. Happy servants serve better, and word has spread. We now have a waiting list of qualified people hoping for positions at Aldermere." Edmund's eyebrow arched in surprise, but he merely nodded. "Very well. You may continue as you see fit, provided the budget increases no further." It was the closest thing to approval he had offered since their wedding, and Cecilia seized the opportunity. "I should also like to reopen the East Wing drawing rooms for entertaining, if you have no objection. The spring season approaches, and I believe it would be appropriate to host some of our neighbours." "As you wish," he replied indifferently, "though I shall likely be in London on business." "Of course," Cecilia murmured, hiding her disappointment. As winter gave way to spring, Cecilia's gentle influence continued to transform Aldermere House. The gardens bloomed with new plantings, the great hall rang with music for the first time in decades, and the local gentry began to receive invitations to dine. Word spread of the Duke's enchanting young wife, whose kindness extended beyond the estate to the neighbouring villages. She established a small school for tenants' children, visited the sick with baskets of food and medicine, and personally intervened when an elderly couple faced eviction from their cottage. Still, Edmund remained distant, often absent in London for weeks at a time. When present, he was unfailingly polite, but revealed nothing of himself. Cecilia's attempts at conversation were met with monosyllabic responses or vague platitudes. One evening, finding herself unable to sleep, Cecilia wandered the corridors of the silent house and noticed light spilling from beneath the door of Edmund's study. Gathering her courage, she knocked softly. "Enter," came his voice, distracted and curt. She found him seated behind a massive desk, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence, a single brandy glass at his elbow. He looked up, clearly startled to see her. "Cecilia, is something amiss?" It was perhaps the first time he had used her given name since their wedding day. "No, I simply saw the light and thought—" She faltered, suddenly unsure why she had come. Edmund's expression softened fractionally. "It's late. You should be abed." "As should you," she ventured. "You work too hard, Edmund." He stiffened at the familiarity, and Cecilia immediately regretted her boldness. "I apologize, Your Grace. I did not mean to disturb you." She turned to leave, blinking back unexpected tears. "Wait." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Tomorrow I leave for London for several weeks. There are matters requiring my attention." "Of course," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I shall ensure Aldemir runs smoothly in your absence." A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed his features before he nodded. "Good night, Duchess." "Good night, Your Grace." As she closed the door, Cecilia leaned against the corridor wall, closing her eyes against the ache in her chest. 6 months married and still a stranger to her own husband. Her mother's hopeful words about patience and tenderness seemed increasingly hollow. Yet as she returned to her solitary chambers, a new resolve hardened within her. If Edmund would not acknowledge her as a wife, she would make him see her as a duchess, the perfect duchess. One so accomplished and admired that even the Duke of Westfield could not ignore her worth. The season in London approached, and Cecilia Carlyle, Duchess of Westfield, prepared to take her place in society, not as the shy daughter of a minor count, but as the mistress of one of England's greatest houses. Edmund might have married her by duty, but she would give him reason to notice her by choice. London, 1803. The Carlisle townhouse on Grosvenor Square stood like a sleeping giant, its windows dark and shuttered, dust covers shrouding the elegant furniture within. No member of the ton had crossed its threshold in nearly 3 years, not since the death of the old Duke's Duchess. Until now. Carriages lined the street as footmen in Westfield livery, midnight blue with silver trim, scurried to assist arriving guests. Inside, crystal chandeliers blazed with light, fresh flowers adorned every surface, and the sounds of a string quartet floated through the grand reception rooms. "The Duchess of Westfield," announced the butler, "welcomes you to Carlisle House." Cecilia stood at the entrance to the ballroom, resplendent in a gown of celestial blue silk that complemented her fair complexion and brought out the deep azure of her eyes. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure, adorned with sapphires that matched her wedding ring. She greeted each guest personally, her genuine warmth in stark contrast to the icy reputation of her absent husband. "My dear Duchess," cooed Lady Harrington, the acknowledged leader of the ton, "you have performed a miracle with this house. We had quite given it up for lost, you know, after the old Duke's time. And where is your distinguished husband this evening?" "The Duke regrets he is detained by business matters," Cecilia replied smoothly, the explanation practiced after countless repetitions. "He hopes to join us later this evening." It was a polite fiction. Edmund had made it abundantly clear he had no intention of attending what he termed frivolous social gatherings. Yet Cecilia persisted in the pretense, preserving his dignity even as he undermined hers with his absence. "Such dedication to his affairs," Lady Harrington remarked with a knowing look. "Well, his loss is our gain. Come, you must tell me about those exquisite Chinese vases in the drawing-room." As the evening progressed, Cecilia circulated among her guests with practiced ease, introducing those who might benefit from acquaintance, smoothing awkward social moments, and ensuring all felt welcome. The supper she had planned featured dishes that soon had the ton buzzing, exotic flavors brought back from the Orient by the trading ships in which the Duke held interest. "The Duchess has quite transformed the dour Duke's household," she overheard one gentleman remark to another. "Who would have thought Westfield would choose such a lively creature?" "I wager he regrets it now," replied his companion with a chuckle. "Nothing worse than a wife who outshines her husband in popularity." Cecilia pretended not to hear, but the words stung. She had not set out to embarrass Edmund or compete with him. She had simply sought to fulfill her role as his Duchess, to create a home and position of which he could be proud. By midnight, the ball was pronounced a resounding success. Even as the last guest departed, invitations were already being pressed into Cecilia's hands. Dinner parties, musicales, afternoon teas, garden fêtes. The Duchess of Westfield had arrived in London society, and she was a sensation. Returning to her chambers, exhausted but exhilarated, Cecilia found a letter waiting on her silver tray. She recognized Edmund's bold handwriting immediately and broke the seal with trembling fingers. "Duchess," it read formally, "word of your social triumph has reached me even at White's. I congratulate you on restoring the Carlisle name to prominence in society circles. My business affairs continue to require my presence elsewhere, but I trust you will represent our interests admirably in my absence. E." Cecilia sank onto her bed, the letter clutched in her hand. Not a word of genuine praise, not a hint of personal acknowledgement. Just another cool assessment, as if she were an investment that had performed adequately. "Rose," she called to her lady's maid, "please help me out of this gown, and then you may retire." Alone, dressed in her nightclothes, Cecilia moved to the window overlooking the square. Carriages still rolled past, bearing revellers home from other entertainments. The London season continued its relentless pace, an endless whirl of social obligations and carefully calculated appearances. Was this to be her life, perpetually performing for an audience that included everyone except the one person whose approval she truly sought? The next morning brought a visitor she had not expected. Her father-in-law's cousin, Lady Victoria Carlisle, an elderly widow who had once been a renowned beauty in her youth, arrived unannounced at the breakfast table. "Well, niece," she declared, helping herself to tea without waiting for an invitation, "you've set tongues wagging from Mayfair to Chelsea. The Perfect Duchess, they're calling you. Quite an achievement for a country girl." Cecilia smiled cautiously. "You're too kind, Lady Victoria." "Nonsense, I'm never kind. I'm honest, which is far more valuable." The older woman fixed her with a shrewd gaze. "The question is, what do you intend to do with this influence you've acquired?" "Do? I merely wish to fulfill my duties as Edmund's wife." Lady Victoria snorted. "My dear girl, power is never merely held. It must be wielded. Edmund may control the purse strings, but you now command something equally valuable, social currency. The real question is whether you possess the wisdom to use it wisely." Over the following weeks, Lady Victoria became Cecilia's unexpected mentor, guiding her through the treacherous waters of London society. Under her tutelage, Cecilia learned which charitable causes carried the most prestige, which political hostesses controlled access to Parliament's inner circles, and most importantly, how to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined the ton. "Never align yourself too closely with any faction," Lady Victoria advised, as they drove through Hyde Park during the fashionable hour. "A duchess stands above petty squabbles. Be gracious to all, intimate with few, and never reveal your true feelings except to those you trust absolutely." "And how does one determine who is trustworthy?" Cecilia asked, acknowledging the stream of gentlemen who bowed to their carriage. "In my experience, niece, one does not. One merely learns to keep one's own counsel." Lady Victoria's gaze sharpened. "Speaking of which, I understand my nephew remains conspicuously absent from your side." Cecilia's smile never faltered, though her heart clenched painfully. "His Grace has many responsibilities that claim his attention." The same was true of his father, yet the old Duke never missed an opportunity to parade my cousin, Edmund's mother, before society. He knew her value. Lady Victoria patted Cecilia's hand. "My nephew is intelligent in business matters, but obtuse in personal ones. A family failing, I'm afraid." As May turned to June, Cecilia's star continued to rise. Her morning calls were eagerly anticipated, her patronage sought for musical performances and art exhibitions. Young ladies copied her gowns, her coiffures, even her manner of speech. Gentlemen composed poems to her beauty and grace, careful to remain just this side of propriety. Through it all, Cecilia maintained a dignified reserve. She was unfailingly gracious but never flirtatious, generous with her attention, but careful of her reputation. Not even the most determined gossip could find fault with her conduct. And still, Edmund stayed away. One afternoon, returning from a charity committee meeting for war widows, Cecilia was surprised to find Lady Victoria waiting in her drawing room, her expression grave. "You've heard the rumors, I presume?" the older woman asked without preamble. Cecilia removed her gloves slowly. "Which rumors might those be? There are so many in London." "Don't play coy, child. The whispers about Edmund and that Barrington woman—" Cecilia's heart seemed to stop. "I'm afraid I don't—" "Diana Barrington, a widow of supposedly impeccable reputation, though I have my doubts. Edmund has been seen in her company repeatedly these past weeks." Lady Victoria's eyes softened with unusual compassion. "I thought you should hear it from someone who cares for you, rather than from the malicious tongues that delight in others' pain." Cecilia sank into a chair, her composure finally cracking. "Are they—" "No one knows with certainty, but they have been observed riding together in Richmond Park, and she has entertained him for private dinners at her home in Chelsea." Lady Victoria leaned forward. "What will you do?" What indeed? The question echoed in Cecilia's mind as she prepared for that evening's engagement, a musicale at the Countess of Reardon's, where half the ton would be in attendance. As her maid arranged her hair, Cecilia studied her reflection. The face that looked back at her was beautiful, yes, but it was also the face of a woman who had allowed herself to be cast aside, to be humiliated. The Perfect Duchess, they called her. What perfection was there in being the perfect fool? "Rose," she said suddenly, "bring me the emerald parure." The maid's eyes widened. "But, Your Grace, you had selected the pearls." "The emeralds," Cecilia repeated firmly. "And the gold tissue gown, not the ivory silk." The ensemble she chose was daring by her usual standards, the deep green of the emeralds making her eyes appear almost turquoise in contrast, the gold gown cut lower across the bodice than her typical selections. She looked like a different woman, regal, confident, alluring. At the Countess's musical, Cecilia felt eyes upon her from the moment she entered. She moved through the crowd with deliberate grace, her smile as practiced as ever, but with a new edge of determination beneath. "Duchess," a deep voice spoke from behind her. What a pleasant surprise. She turned to find Lord Richard Halsey, the Earl of Renfield, regarding her with undisguised admiration. Handsome, wealthy, and possessed of a dangerous reputation with women, he was precisely the sort of gentleman she had always been careful to keep at a polite distance. "My lord," she acknowledged, with a slight inclination of her head, "I trust you are enjoying the performance." "Far less than I am enjoying the view at present," he replied, his gaze lingering on the emeralds at her throat, and perhaps a touch too long on what lay beneath them. In the past, Cecilia would have found some graceful way to extricate herself from such an exchange. Tonight she allowed it to continue. "You flatter me, my lord." "Not at all. I merely speak the truth, which is that you outshine every other woman in London." He offered his arm. "Might I escort you to the refreshment room? I find myself suddenly parched." Cecilia hesitated only a moment before placing her gloved hand upon his sleeve. How could I refuse such a gallant invitation? As they made their way through the crowded rooms, Cecilia was acutely aware of the speculative glances and whispered comments that followed them. The Perfect Duchess, allowing herself to be singled out by London's most notorious rake. It would be all over the ton by morning. Let it be, she thought with a flash of defiance. Let Edmund hear how his neglected wife seeks attention elsewhere. But as Lord Halsey procured champagne for them both, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her the glass, Cecilia felt a wave of revulsion, not at his touch, but at her own pettiness. This was not who she was, not who she wished to be. Using another person to provoke jealousy in her husband would only diminish her own dignity, not enhance it. "My lord," she said, setting down her untouched champagne, "I fear I have remembered a prior engagement. Please excuse me." Confusion, then understanding, crossed his features. "Of course, Duchess, but should you ever find yourself with an unexpected vacancy in your schedule, my door is always open to you." The innuendo was unmistakable. Cecilia met his gaze coldly. "I think not, Lord Halsey. Good evening." She made her way back to the main salon with her head high, stopping to speak with acquaintances as though nothing untoward had occurred. But inside, her emotions churned like a tempest. Later that night, alone in her bedchamber, Cecilia paced the floor, the emeralds cast aside on her dressing table. What was she becoming? A bitter woman playing social games to wound an indifferent husband. The very thought repulsed her. No, she would not allow Edmund's coldness to transform her into someone she could not respect. If he chose to dishonor their vows with Mrs. Barrington, that was his failing, not hers. Sitting at her escritoire, Cecilia penned a carefully worded note to her husband, requesting his presence at the Devonshire's ball the following week, the culminating event of the season where all of society would gather. She made no mention of rumors or wounded feelings, simply expressed the hope that he might find time in his busy schedule to attend this one significant occasion. The response came 2 days later, a terse acknowledgement that he would endeavor to make an appearance, though he could not guarantee at what hour. It was more than she had dared hope for. That night, Cecilia slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The Duke of Devonshire's annual midsummer ball was the pinnacle of the London season, the event by which all others were measured. The guest list was rigorously exclusive, the entertainment lavish, the supper sumptuous. To be invited was a mark of social acceptance. To be noted as a success that could make one's reputation for years to come. Cecilia dressed with particular care, selecting a gown of deep royal blue silk that complemented her coloring without being ostentatious. Her only jewels were her sapphire wedding ring and a simple diamond necklace, elegant but understated, allowing her natural beauty to shine. She arrived fashionably late, escorted by Lady Victoria, who had appointed herself Cecilia's unofficial chaperone throughout the season. As they were announced at the entrance to the ballroom, a subtle hush fell over the assembled guests. "Chin up, shoulders back," Lady Victoria murmured. "Remember who you are, the Duchess of Westfield, wife to one of England's most powerful peers. A woman who had earned the respect of society through her own merits, not merely her husband's title." Cecilia glided into the room with serene confidence, acknowledging acquaintances with warm smiles and graceful nods. She accepted compliments on her appearance with modest thanks, deflected inquiries about Edmund's whereabouts with practiced ease, and maintained an outward calm that belied her inner anxiety. Would he come? And if he did, what then? The evening wore on. Cecilia danced with carefully selected partners, elderly gentlemen, happily married men, or young lords so junior in rank that no one could misconstrue her intentions. She conversed amiably with matrons and debutantes alike, careful to give no hint of the preoccupation that consumed her thoughts. It was approaching midnight when a stir at the entrance drew her attention. The butler announced in sonorous tones, "His Grace the Duke of Westfield." Edmund stood framed in the doorway, resplendent in formal evening attire, his bearing as commanding as ever. The crowd parted before him as he made his way across the ballroom, acknowledging greetings with brief nods. He was moving directly toward her, Cecilia realized with a start. Her heart began to race, her palms damp within her gloves. She had not seen him in nearly 3 months, had almost forgotten the power of his physical presence, the way his gaze could seem to penetrate to one's very soul. "Duchess," he said, bowing formally before her. "You look well." "Your Grace," she curtsied. "I'm pleased you could attend." They regarded each other for a long moment, strangers who had pledged their lives to one another, now meeting as though at a diplomatic function between hostile nations. "I believe this dance is mine," Edmund stated, offering his hand. Cecilia placed her fingers in his, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor as whispers erupted in their wake. The orchestra struck up a waltz, still considered daringly intimate by some of the older generation, and Edmund's hand settled at her waist, his touch impersonal yet proprietary. They moved together with surprising harmony, their bodies remembering the steps practiced for their wedding ball, though they had rarely danced since. "You have been busy in my absence," Edmund remarked as they circled the floor. "Your name appears in the society pages with remarkable frequency." "I have merely attempted to fulfill my duties as your Duchess," Cecilia replied evenly. "Since you married me for that purpose, I assumed you would approve." A flicker of something, surprise, admiration, crossed his features. "Indeed, you have exceeded all expectations in that regard. The Perfect Duchess, they call you, I understand." "So I am told." She met his gaze steadily. Though perfection is a heavy burden to bear, especially alone. The implication hung between them, unaddressed as the music swelled. They completed the dance in silence, the tension between them palpable even to observers. As the final notes died away, Edmund escorted her from the floor, his expression unreadable. "I have taken lodgings at White's for the night," he informed her. "I return to Aldermere tomorrow. Business matters, you understand." Cecilia's heart sank. Nothing had changed then. One dance, a few words exchanged, and he would disappear from her life once more. "Of course," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Will you require me to cut short my season and return as well?" "That won't be necessary. I am aware of your numerous social commitments." His tone was dismissive. "You may remain in London as long as you wish." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of a striking woman in a gown of deep burgundy, her dark hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure adorned with rubies. "Edmund, darling," the woman purred, laying a possessive hand on the Duke's arm. "You promised me the supper dance, remember?" Cecilia felt as though she had been struck. This then must be Diana Barrington. She was beautiful in a bold, sensual way, everything Cecilia was not, with knowing eyes and a mouth made for secrets. Edmund stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Barrington, may I present my wife, Her Grace, the Duchess of Westfield?" The widow's smile never wavered as she turned to Cecilia. "Your Grace, what an honor. I have heard so much about you." "How curious," Cecilia replied, her own smile firmly in place. "I have heard almost nothing about you." Mrs. Barrington's eyes widened fractionally at the subtle barb. "Edmund and I are old acquaintances. Our families have known each other for years." "Indeed. How fortunate for you both to have rekindled such a long-standing connection." Cecilia turned to her husband. "I should not wish to keep you from your promised dance, Your Grace. If you'll excuse me, I believe the Countess of Reardon was hoping to introduce me to her nephew." With a perfect curtsy she withdrew, her dignity intact, even as her heart shattered within her breast. She made her way through the crowd with practiced grace, stopping to exchange pleasantries as though nothing were amiss, while inside she burned with humiliation. He had brought his mistress to the same ball as his wife. The insult could not have been more deliberate or more public. From across the room she saw Lady Victoria watching her with concern. The older woman began to move toward her, but Cecilia gave a slight shake of her head. She could not bear sympathy at this moment. It would surely break the composure she was desperately maintaining. Instead, she slipped through a side door onto a deserted terrace, gulping the cool night air in an attempt to calm her racing pulse. Stars glittered overhead, indifferent to human sorrows, while the muted sounds of music and laughter drifted from the ballroom. "Duchess?" The voice startled her. Turning, she found Edmund standing in the doorway, his expression inscrutable in the shadows. "Your Grace," she acknowledged stiffly. "Have you misplaced your partner?" Edmund moved toward her, stopping an arm's length away. "Mrs. Barrington is not my partner, as you put it. She is the widow of a business associate who has been assisting me with certain financial arrangements." "How fortunate that business and pleasure can be so conveniently combined," Cecilia replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "You misunderstand the situation." "Do I?" She faced him squarely. "Then enlighten me, husband. Explain why all of London whispers of your frequent visits to her home. Why you spend your evenings in her company while neglecting your wife." Edmund's jaw tightened. "I owe you no explanations for how I conduct my affairs." "Affairs," an apt choice of words. Cecilia laughed, a brittle sound with no trace of humor. "You married me to be the perfect Duchess, to host your events, manage your household, provide you an heir. I have fulfilled 2 of those obligations admirably. The third, however, requires your presence in my bed, a place you have visited precisely once on our wedding night, and even then with such obvious distaste that you could not bring yourself to complete the act." Edmund stepped back as though she had struck him, shock evident in his features. Never had Cecilia spoken so boldly, so crudely, about intimate matters. "That is not," he began, but she cut him off. "Not what? Not true. We both know it is. You performed your husbandly duty with the same enthusiasm one might bring to signing a particularly tedious contract, then departed with obvious relief when it was finished. Or rather, unfinished." Cecilia felt tears threatening but forced them back. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her weep. "I accepted our arrangement," she continued, her voice steadier now. "I understood you married me for convenience, not affection. But I did not agree to be humiliated before all of society, by your blatant disregard for our vows. Edmund was silent for a long moment, his expression hidden in the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. You are mistaken about Mrs. Barrington, but you are not mistaken about my failings as a husband. He took a step toward her. I have treated you unconscionably, Cecilia. For that, I apologize. The unexpected admission stole the wind from her sails. Of all the responses she had anticipated, contrition had not been among them. Why? She asked simply. Why marry me only to ignore me? What purpose did it serve? Edmund ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from a man who rarely displayed emotion. I needed a duchess, not a wife, he said finally. My position demanded it. The Westfield title requires an heir, and society expects certain appearances to be maintained. But why me? Cecilia persisted. There were dozens of eligible young women that season, many with larger dowries and better connections. A fleeting smile crossed his features. You were different. Quiet, but not meek. Observant. Your eyes missed nothing, yet you spoke no gossip. Your father's reputation for integrity, though his estate was modest. Edmund shrugged. You seemed suitable. Suitable, Cecilia repeated, the word like ash in her mouth. How flattering. It was not meant to be flattering or insulting. It was a practical decision. He turned away, gazing out at the darkened gardens. I did not anticipate that you would become what you have become. And what have I become, Edmund? She asked softly. He was silent for a long moment. Something I did not expect, he said finally. Someone who has earned the admiration of society not through my name, but through her own merit. He turned to face her again. Someone who makes me appear lesser by comparison. The admission hung between them, startling in its vulnerability. That was never my intention, Cecilia said. I know. Edmund took a step closer. Mrs. Barrington is not my mistress, Cecilia. She is a financial agent. A role she assumed after her husband's death left her with substantial business interests but little knowledge of how to manage them. I have been helping her establish herself independently in exchange for her assistance with certain delicate negotiations involving foreign investments. You expect me to believe that your frequent private dinners with a beautiful widow are merely business engagements? Cecilia's voice held a note of incredulity. I expect you to believe the truth, Edmund replied evenly. Diana Barrington poses as a frivolous society widow, but beneath that facade lies one of the shrewdest financial minds I have encountered. Her late husband's shipping concerns give her access to information from the continent that is invaluable in these uncertain times. With Napoleon's ambitions growing daily, Cecilia studied his face, searching for signs of deception. Even if what you say is true, why the secrecy? Why not simply tell me? Because the success of our ventures depends upon discretion. If it were known that a woman was involved in such significant financial dealings, he shook his head. Society would never accept it. Her reputation would be ruined and our business interests compromised. It was plausible, Cecilia had to admit. Unconventional, certainly, but not impossible. Yet something still did not make sense. That explains your association with Mrs. Barrington, perhaps. It does not explain why you have avoided my company so assiduously since our wedding day. Edmund's expression shuddered. That is a separate matter. Not to me, Cecilia insisted. Not when I have lived as little more than a ghost in your house, wondering what defect in me repelled you so thoroughly that you could barely stand to be in the same room. There is no defect in you, he said sharply. The deficiency is mine alone. Cecilia waited, but he offered no further explanation. The sounds of the orchestra drifted through the open doors, another waltz beginning, another opportunity for couples to share the intimacy of the dance floor. I should return, she said finally, disappointment a leaden weight in her chest. Lady Victoria will be concerned about my prolonged absence. As she moved toward the terrace doors, Edmund's voice halted her. I leave for Aldermere tomorrow, as I mentioned. I would appreciate it if you would join me. There are matters we should discuss that cannot be adequately addressed in London, where we are constantly observed. Cecilia turned back, surprised by the request. You wish me to abandon the season early. There are still several important events. I am aware, he interrupted. But I believe this conversation is more important than any ball or soiree. Do you not agree? There was an earnestness in his manner that she had never witnessed before, a hint of the man who might exist beneath the cold, dutiful exterior he had always presented. Very well, she agreed cautiously. I shall make arrangements to depart tomorrow. Edmund nodded, relief evident in his posture. Thank you, I shall send the carriage for you at noon. They stood regarding each other for a moment longer, the air between them charged with unspoken words and unexpressed emotions. We should rejoin the company, Cecilia suggested. Separately, perhaps, to avoid speculation. As you wish. Edmund hesitated, then added, For what it is worth, Cecilia, you have indeed been the perfect Duchess. Far better than I deserved. Before she could respond, he bowed and left the terrace, leaving her alone with the stars and her tumultuous thoughts. The journey to Aldermere the following day passed in uncomfortable silence. Edmund had sent his private coach for Cecilia as promised, but to her surprise, he was already seated within when she entered. They exchanged polite greetings before lapsing into silence, each apparently lost in private contemplation as the countryside rolled past. It was early evening when they arrived at the estate, the golden light of the setting sun bathing the stone facade of Aldermere House in a warm glow. Servants lined up to greet them, their genuine pleasure at seeing their mistress return evident in their faces. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Mrs. Fairchild curtsied to Cecilia. "We've prepared your chambers as requested." "Thank you, Mrs. Fairchild. It's good to be back." Cecilia smiled warmly at the staff before turning to her husband. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace, I should like to refresh myself after the journey." "Of course," Edmund nodded. "Perhaps you would join me for dinner at 8, in the small dining room, I think." The invitation surprised her. They had rarely dined together at Aldermere, with Edmund typically taking his meals in his study. "I would be pleased to do so," she replied. In her chambers, as Rose helped her change from her travelling clothes into a dinner gown, Cecilia found herself unexpectedly nervous. Something had shifted between herself and Edmund, but she could not yet determine what it meant or where it might lead. "You look pale, Your Grace," Rose observed, as she arranged Cecilia's hair in a simple but elegant style. "Was the journey very tiring?" "A little," Cecilia admitted, "but it's nothing that a good night's rest won't cure." At precisely 8 o'clock, she made her way to the small dining room, an intimate space rarely used during her time at Aldermere. To her surprise, Edmund awaited her personally rather than having a footman show her in. "Cecilia," he greeted her, moving forward to pull out her chair, "you look lovely this evening." "Thank you," she replied, disconcerted by this unexpected gallantry. "Aldermere appears to be thriving in our absence. The gardens looked particularly fine as we arrived. Credit must go to your instructions, I believe. The head gardener speaks of little else but Her Grace's vision whenever I encounter him." Edmund took his seat opposite her, as a footman poured wine for them both. The meal proceeded with surprisingly comfortable conversation about the estate, the recent improvements Cecilia had instituted, and the progress of various charitable projects she had established in the surrounding villages. Edmund listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering occasional suggestions. It was only as dessert was served that he steered the conversation toward more personal matters. "I owe you an explanation," he said abruptly, setting down his fork, "for my behavior these past months." Cecilia placed her own utensils on her plate, her appetite suddenly gone. "I'm listening." Edmund signaled the footmen to withdraw, waiting until they were truly alone before continuing. "My first marriage was not a happy one," he said quietly. Cecilia stared at him in shock. "Your first marriage? I don't understand." "Few do." It was deliberately kept quiet, a youthful indiscretion, quickly annulled but with consequences that have shaped my life ever since. Edmund's gaze was fixed on the middle distance, as though seeing into the past. I was 22, newly graduated from Oxford. Against my father's wishes, I married Caroline Devereux, the daughter of a wealthy merchant. We had known each other barely 3 months. Cecilia listened, stunned. Nothing in Edmund's background had hinted at a previous marriage. "What happened?" "She was—" Edmund hesitated, searching for words. "She was not what she seemed. The sweet, innocent girl I believed I had married revealed herself to be calculating and cruel. She had targeted me for my title, my fortune, caring nothing for me as a man." His jaw tightened at the memory. When she realized that my father had cut off my allowance as punishment for my disobedience, she sought comfort elsewhere, with multiple men, including my closest friend. "Oh, Edmund," Cecilia murmured, understanding beginning to dawn. "The marriage was annulled within 6 months. My father used his influence to keep the scandal contained. Officially, the union never happened. Caroline received a settlement in exchange for her discretion and disappeared to the continent." Edmund took a long swallow of wine. "I learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of allowing emotion to override reason, particularly where marriage is concerned." "So, when you married me," Cecilia began. "I approached it as a business arrangement," Edmund confirmed. "No emotional entanglements, no opportunities for disappointment or betrayal. A practical union between two people with complementary needs." "And our wedding night?" Cecilia asked, emboldened by his candor. "Your reluctance?" A flush crept up Edmund's neck. "That was, complicated. I had vowed never to put myself in a position of vulnerability again, to maintain distance." He met her eyes directly. "But you were so trusting, so innocent. I found I could not complete our union as expected, without feeling I was somehow tainting something pure with my cynicism. So I withdrew, telling myself it was for the best, that maintaining emotional distance was essential." "Yet you still need an heir," Cecilia pointed out. "Yes, I had planned to address that obligation once I had fully secured my business interests, when I could approach the matter with appropriate detachment." He grimaced. "It sounds cold-blooded," explained aloud. "It is," Cecilia agreed, "though I begin to understand your reasoning, misguided as it was." Edmund regarded her with something like admiration. "Few women would be so direct in their assessment. Few women have endured what I have these past months," she countered. "Tell me, Edmund, what changed? Why bring me back to Aldemir now for this conversation?" He was silent for a long moment, considering his response. "When I first began hearing reports of your success in London, the Perfect Duchess they called you, I felt a measure of satisfaction. My choice had been vindicated. You were fulfilling the role for which I had selected you admirably." He rose from his chair, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened gardens. "But as your reputation grew, as tales of your kindness, your grace, your genuine concern for others reached me, I began to realize what I had discarded. Not just a suitable wife, but an exceptional woman of character and substance." Turning back to face her, his expression was more open than she had ever seen it. "Then came the rumors about Diana Barrington, and I saw how they hurt you. I watched you at the Devonshire's ball, maintaining your dignity even as society whispered behind your back. I realized then that I had done you a grave injustice, allowed you to believe yourself unwanted, when in truth," he faltered, and Cecilia found herself holding her breath. "When in truth I had begun to want you very much indeed," Edmund finished softly. "Not as a convenient duchess, but as a woman, as my wife in more than name." Cecilia's heart thundered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Words come easily, Edmund. Actions are what matter. You're right, of course." He moved toward her, extending his hand. "Will you walk with me? There is something I wish to show you." Curiosity overcoming caution, Cecilia placed her hand in his, and allowed him to lead her from the dining room through the grand hall and up the central staircase. To her surprise, they headed toward the wing that housed Edmund's private apartments, a part of the house she had never been invited to enter. At the end of a long corridor, Edmund paused before a carved mahogany door, producing a key from his waistcoat pocket. "This room has been locked since I returned from my grand tour at the age of 20, he explained as he turned the key. "No one enters, not servants, not family, not even myself most days." The door swung open to reveal a chamber bathed in moonlight from tall windows. As Edmund lit a lamp, Cecilia gasped in wonder. The room was an artist's studio. Easels stood draped in protective cloths, shelves lined with paint pots and brushes lined one wall, and canvases in various states of completion were stacked against another. In the center, on a prominent easel, stood a portrait shrouded by a velvet cover. "You paint," Cecilia whispered, amazed by this hidden aspect of her husband. "Once I did. It was my passion, my one true talent according to my tutors." Edmund moved to the covered canvas. "My father considered it an unworthy pursuit for the future Duke of Westfield. When I defied him by marrying Caroline, he made me promise to abandon painting as part of the conditions for remaining his heir after the annulment. He drew a deep breath. I kept that promise until recently. With a decisive gesture, he pulled away the velvet covering, revealing a nearly completed portrait beneath. Cecilia stared in astonishment at her own image looking back at her. The painting captured her in profile, seated at her writing desk in the morning room at Aldermere, sunlight streaming through the window to illuminate her face as she wrote a letter. The expression the artist, Edmund, had captured was one of quiet determination mixed with a hint of sadness, a depth of emotion that spoke volumes about the subject's inner life. "When did you—" she began, unable to complete the question. "I began it after your first month at Aldermere," Edmund admitted. "I would watch you sometimes when you were unaware. The way you transformed my cold house into a home, it awakened something in me I thought long dead." He touched the canvas reverently. "I could not approach you directly. Too much cynicism, too much fear remained. But I could paint you, try to capture the essence of the woman who had entered my life unexpectedly and changed everything around her." Cecilia studied the portrait, moved beyond words by both its beauty and its implications. Edmund had seen her, truly seen her, even while keeping her at arm's length. "There are others," he said quietly, moving to a stack of canvases leaning against the wall. He turned them one by one to reveal a series of studies. Cecilia in the garden with secateurs in hand, Cecilia reading by firelight, Cecilia speaking with Mrs. Fairchild, her expression animated, Cecilia asleep in a chair, her face peaceful in repose. "You've been painting me all this time," she whispered, "while pretending I barely existed." "I was a coward," Edmund acknowledged, "too afraid to risk my heart again, yet unable to ignore the woman who had begun to claim it despite my best efforts." He set down the last canvas and turned to her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed before. "I do not deserve your forgiveness, Cecilia. I have treated you abominably, but I ask for a chance to become the husband you deserve, to build together the marriage I was too frightened to contemplate before." Cecilia regarded him thoughtfully. "And if I refuse? If I prefer to maintain our current arrangement, the perfect Duchess in public, separate lives in private?" Edmund paled but nodded. "Then I would respect your decision. You have built a life and identity of your own, independent of me. I would not presume to dismantle it without your consent." His humility, his willingness to accept her terms rather than impose his own, these were new facets of the man she had married, but never truly known. Cecilia moved closer to the portrait, studying the face Edmund had rendered with such care and understanding. "Tell me one thing," she said finally, turning to face him. "If I agree to this new beginning between us, what becomes of Diana Barrington? Our business association continues as it must." "But with complete transparency to you," Edmund replied without hesitation. "You would be welcome to attend any meeting, review any document. I have nothing to hide, Cecilia. Not any more." She nodded slowly, weighing his words against the evidence before her. The hidden studio, the portraits painted in secret, the raw honesty in his eyes as he awaited her verdict. "I cannot promise immediate trust," she said carefully. "That must be earned. But I can promise to remain open to the possibility of the marriage you describe." Relief washed over Edmund's features. He stepped forward, tentatively taking her hands in his. "That is more than I deserve, and all that I can ask." In the soft lamplight of the studio, surrounded by images of herself seen through her husband's eyes, Cecilia allowed herself to hope that perhaps the perfect Duchess might yet find her perfect match in the imperfect Duke who had finally opened his heart. Summer faded into autumn, painting the grounds of Aldermere in rich golds and crimsons as Edmund and Cecilia cautiously navigated their changing relationship. True to his word, Edmund made no demands, instead inviting Cecilia into his daily life with a patience that surprised her. Each morning brought a small note with her breakfast tray, sometimes a few lines of poetry, occasionally a sketch, often simply a wish for her day to be pleasant. Each evening found them dining together, their conversations gradually deepening from estate matters to personal histories, hopes, and even dreams. "Tell me about your childhood," Edmund requested one evening in late September as they sat before the fire in the library, the rain pattering against the windows. "I know so little of your life before we met," Cecilia smiled, setting aside her embroidery. It was quiet, but happy. My father may not be the wealthiest of men, but he gave us a home filled with affection and learning. My mother taught me music and languages. My father insisted I understand estate management and basic accounting alongside my feminine accomplishments. That explains your aptitude for household affairs, Edmund observed. Most young ladies of your station would be at sea trying to manage a property like Aldermere. My father believed that true nobility lies in competence, not just bloodlines, Cecilia replied. He would say, a title without capability is merely decoration, but capability will serve you whether you have a title or not. Edmund nodded thoughtfully. A wise philosophy. My own father was rather more traditional in his approach. Titles were everything. Capability assumed by birthright rather than cultivated through education. Yet you seem to have escaped that limitation, Cecilia noted. Your business acumen is widely acknowledged. Necessity more than inclination, Edmund admitted. When I returned from my grand tour to find our family finances in disarray due to my father's poor management, I had little choice but to educate myself quickly. Cecilia tilted her head, studying him. Is that why you turned to painting? As an escape from those pressures? A smile touched Edmund's lips. Perceptive as always. Yes, art was my refuge, the one place where I answered to no one's expectations but my own. He hesitated before adding, would you sit for me properly? Until now, I've worked from memory and glimpses. I should like to paint you as you truly are. The request surprised her. You wish me to pose? If you're willing. In the studio with proper light. A formal portrait of the Duchess of Westfield seems long overdue. The intimacy of such an arrangement, hours spent in each other's company, his eyes upon her, studying every nuance of her face and form, sent a tremor of anticipation through Cecilia. I would be honored, she replied softly. The following afternoon found Cecilia seated by the large north-facing window of Edmund's studio, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. Edmund moved about the room with easy confidence, arranging her pose, adjusting the fall of light, his manner professional yet touched with a warmth that made her heart quicken. Turn your head slightly to the left, he instructed, approaching to gently position her chin with his fingertips. Yes, just so. Now look toward the window, as though you've caught sight of something intriguing in the distance. Cecilia complied, acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of him. Sandalwood and linseed oil enveloping her senses. Perfect, he murmured, his breath warm against her cheek, before he withdrew to his easel. Now, if you can maintain that position comfortably. I believe I can manage, she assured him, settling into the pose. As Edmund began to sketch, his expression transformed, the reserve that typically characterized his features giving way to intense focus and quiet passion. His eyes moved constantly between her and the canvas, his hand sure and swift as it traced the contours of her face. May I speak, or will it disturb your concentration? Cecilia asked after several minutes of silence. Edmund glanced up, a small smile playing at his lips. Please speak. In fact, I prefer it. Your face is most alive when you're engaged in conversation. Tell me when you first knew you had artistic talent, she suggested. Edmund considered as he continued to work. I must have been about 7 years old. My tutor had taken ill, and I was left to my own devices for an afternoon. I found myself in the portrait gallery, staring up at my ancestors. His expression softened at the memory. Something about the 5th Duke's portrait captivated me, the way light and shadow played across his face, creating the illusion of life on flat canvas. I borrowed a pencil and paper from my father's study and attempted to copy it. Were you successful? Cecilia asked, intrigued. Hardly, Edmund chuckled. It was a child's crude sketch, but my mother happened upon me and saw something in my efforts. She arranged for proper art lessons against my father's wishes. It became our secret conspiracy, my mother, my art master, and I. She must have been a remarkable woman, Cecilia observed. A shadow crossed Edmund's face. She was. Kind, gentle, but with a core of steel when it mattered most. She died when I was 15, consumption. My father never recovered from her loss. Perhaps that's why he grew so rigid, so uncompromising. I'm sorry, Cecilia said softly. I lost my younger sister to the same disease when I was 12. Eleanor was only 9. Edmund's hand paused, his eyes meeting hers with genuine empathy. You never mentioned a sister. The pain was too fresh, even years later, Cecilia admitted. My parents rarely speak of her still. But she was beautiful, full of laughter and mischief. Sometimes I wonder what kind of woman she might have become. What are your most treasured memories of her? Edmund asked, resuming his work. No one had ever asked Cecilia about Eleanor in such a direct yet gentle way. The question opened a floodgate of recollections, shared secrets, midnight feasts, imaginary worlds created beneath the apple trees in their garden. As she spoke, Edmund listened attentively, his brush moving with sure strokes across the canvas. The afternoon light shifted gradually, casting long shadows across the floor as minutes stretched into hours. I believe that's enough for today, Edmund finally announced, setting down his palette. You've been remarkably patient. May I see? Cecilia asked, rising from her chair with a small wince as her stiff muscles protested. Edmund hesitated. It's only the beginning, the underpainting. Not much to look at yet. Nevertheless, I'd like to see the progress, she insisted gently. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, stepping aside to allow her approach. Cecilia moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching as they regarded the canvas together. The image emerging from Edmund's brushes took her breath away. Though indeed just beginning, the portrait already captured something essential about her. Not merely her physical appearance, but a quality of spirit that she herself might not have recognized without seeing it through his eyes. Edmund, she whispered, it's extraordinary. He shook his head. It merely reflects what is before me. Their eyes met, and Cecilia found herself unable to look away. Something passed between them, a current of understanding, of mutual recognition that transcended words. Edmund reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, with fingers still stained with paint. Cecilia, A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They stepped apart as Edmund called, Enter. Wilson, the steward, appeared, his expression apologetic. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but an urgent message has arrived from London. Mr. Harrison indicates it requires your immediate attention. Edmund frowned. Very well, I shall be down directly. As Wilson withdrew, Edmund turned back to Cecilia, with regret evident in his features. Business matters, always at the most inopportune moments. Of course, she nodded, composing herself. Duty calls. Would you be willing to sit again tomorrow? He asked, uncertainty in his voice that she found strangely endearing in a man usually so decisive. I would like that very much, Cecilia replied with a smile. That evening at dinner, Edmund seemed preoccupied, responding to Cecilia's conversational overtures with distracted politeness. Finally, as the dessert course was cleared, he addressed the elephant in the room. I apologize for my inattention, he said. The message from London contained concerning news. There are rumors of a French agent operating within certain financial circles, attempting to destabilize investments critical to England's war efforts. Cecilia set down her wineglass. That sounds serious indeed. It is. I may need to return to London earlier than anticipated to address the matter. Edmund hesitated before adding, Diana Barrington has been instrumental in uncovering this plot, at considerable risk to herself. Cecilia felt a familiar twinge of unease at the mention of the widow's name, but reminded herself of Edmund's promise of transparency. I see. When do you anticipate departing? Tomorrow, if the Morning Post confirms my suspicions. Edmund studied her face carefully. I had hoped, that is, I wondered if you might consider accompanying me. The invitation surprised her. You wish me to join you in London? But the season has ended. Society has dispersed to country estates. Precisely why it would be an ideal time for us to be in town together, without the constant social obligations that consumed your previous visit. Edmund leaned forward, his expression earnest. I would like you to meet with Diana properly, to understand the nature of our association and perhaps to witness the business side of my life as I have begun to appreciate the domestic side of yours. Cecilia considered the proposal. Part of her recoiled at the thought of facing the woman who had featured so prominently in London gossip about her husband. Yet another part, the part that had begun to hope for true partnership in her marriage, recognized the significance of Edmund's invitation. "Very well," she agreed finally. "When shall we depart?" Relief washed over Edmund's features. "Thank you. If circumstances require it, we shall leave tomorrow afternoon. I'll have the staff prepare." The following morning brought confirmation of Edmund's concerns in the form of a coded message from his solicitor. By mid-afternoon, their trunks were packed, the carriage waiting in the circular drive before Aldermere's imposing facade. As they settled into the well-sprung vehicle for the journey to London, Cecilia noted a leather portfolio tucked beside Edmund on the seat. "Work to occupy you during the journey?" she inquired. Edmund glanced at the portfolio, then back at her with an almost boyish smile. "Not exactly. I thought perhaps we might discuss these together." Opening the leather case, he withdrew several sheets of paper covered with architectural drawings and notes. "Plans for Aldermere?" Cecilia asked, leaning forward with interest. "Yes, I've been considering renovations to the east wing, modernizing the family apartments, adding more windows to capture the morning light." Edmund spread the papers between them. "I value your opinion on the matter, as you'll be the one overseeing the work while I attend to business concerns." The casual confidence in her capabilities, the assumption of her continued presence and influence at Aldermere, these spoke volumes about the shift in Edmund's perspective. He was no longer merely accommodating her presence in his life, he was actively incorporating her into his future plans. As the carriage rolled toward London, they bent their heads together over the drawings, discussing possibilities, sharing ideas, finding common ground in the practical details of creating a more comfortable home. The journey passed swiftly, the miles falling away as their conversation flowed easily from topic to topic. By the time they reached the outskirts of London the following day, Cecilia realized with some surprise that she had spent nearly 24 hours in Edmund's exclusive company without a moment of the awkwardness or tension that had characterized so much of their marriage. The Carlisle townhouse on Grosvenor Square welcomed them with polished efficiency, the staff clearly delighted by the unexpected arrival of both master and mistress. Dinner was served in the small dining room, an intimate affair that concluded with Edmund reluctantly excusing himself to attend to urgent correspondence. "Business cannot wait, I'm afraid," he apologized, pressing her hand briefly. "But tomorrow, if you're agreeable, I should like to introduce you to certain aspects of my work that have remained separate from our marriage until now." "I look forward to it," Cecilia replied, finding that she meant it sincerely. The following morning, after a light breakfast, Edmund escorted Cecilia not to his own offices in the city as she had expected, but to a modest townhouse in a quiet street near St. James's Park. A discreet brass plate beside the door read simply, "Barrington Associates." Edmund caught her hesitation as they approached the entrance. "Diana conducts her business here, away from prying eyes. Few would think to look for significant financial transactions in such an unassuming location, or under a woman's direction." Before Cecilia could respond, the door opened to reveal a soberly dressed clerk, who bowed respectfully. "Your Grace, Mrs. Barrington is expecting you in the upper office." They were shown to a well-appointed room on the second floor, where Diana Barrington sat behind a large desk covered with ledgers and correspondence. She rose as they entered, her expression revealing momentary surprise at Cecilia's presence. "Edmund, I didn't realize," she began, before collecting herself with admirable poise. "Your Grace, how lovely to see you again under more favorable circumstances." Cecilia inclined her head gracefully. "Mrs. Barrington, my husband speaks highly of your business acumen." If Diana was taken aback by this direct acknowledgement of her unconventional role, she concealed it well. "Your husband exaggerates my modest talents. Please, both of you, be seated. We have much to discuss." Over the next hour, Cecilia observed in fascination as Edmund and Diana reviewed intelligence reports, financial projections, and correspondence intercepts that painted a disturbing picture of French attempts to manipulate the London markets ahead of a planned naval offensive. "Our agent in Paris confirms that Napoleon intends to strike at British shipping in the Channel within the month," Diana explained, indicating a coded message. "If they succeed in depressing certain stocks beforehand, the resulting panic could cripple our ability to finance the fleet's response." "We must move carefully," Edmund mused, studying the documents before him. "Too obvious a counter-strategy will alert them to our awareness." Precisely why I've begun gradually shifting investments through multiple intermediaries. Diana nodded. Small movements, nothing to draw attention, but collectively significant. Cecilia listened attentively, impressed by the woman's sharp intelligence and strategic thinking, qualities society would never glimpse beneath her carefully maintained facade of frivolous widowhood. You mentioned concerned parties in the Admiralty, Edmund prompted. What progress on that front? Diana glanced briefly at Cecilia before responding. Admiral Harrington has agreed to meet, but only under the most discreet circumstances. He remains skeptical of information coming from unconventional sources, by which he means a woman, Cecilia observed quietly. Diana's eyes met hers with a flash of surprised appreciation. Precisely, Your Grace. Hence the need for Edmund's presence. The Admiral will listen to a duke where he would dismiss a widow. Even when the widow possesses superior information, Edmund added with a trace of frustration. The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow evening at Lord Ravenscroft's hunting box in Surrey, ostensibly a small gathering of gentlemen for cards and conversation. While I establish a conspicuous presence at Lady Heatherton's musicale, Diana continued, to ensure no connection is drawn between us. Cecilia considered this complex dance of appearances and realities, the necessary deceptions, the hidden truths, the careful maintenance of social facades to protect vital national interests. It seems I have underestimated the complexity of your association, she acknowledged, addressing both Edmund and Diana, and perhaps misjudged its nature entirely. Diana's expression softened. Your misapprehension was natural, Your Grace, given the circumstances. Indeed, it was partly by design. Better for society to whisper about a scandalous affair than to suspect the true nature of our meetings. A stratagem that served its purpose in preserving secrecy, but at considerable cost to my wife's peace of mind, Edmund observed grimly. A cost I now recognize was too high. Diana nodded, her gaze direct as she addressed Cecilia. I owe you an apology, Your Grace. While our work necessitates discretion, I might have found ways to minimize the personal consequences to you. The sincerity in the woman's voice was unmistakable. Cecilia found her lingering resentment dissolving in the face of this unexpected validation. What's done is done, she replied with quiet dignity. My concern now is how I might assist in your current endeavors, if indeed you believe I can be of service. Edmund and Diana exchanged surprised glances. You wish to participate in this work? Edmund asked, unable to conceal his astonishment. I do, Cecilia affirmed. If what you say is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, then this matter affects not merely your business interests, but England itself. As your wife, as the Duchess of Westfield, and as an Englishwoman, I have both the right and the responsibility to contribute where I can. Diana studied her thoughtfully. Your assistance could indeed prove valuable, particularly in areas where neither Edmund nor I can operate effectively. Such as, Cecilia prompted. Society, Diana explained. While the season has officially ended, certain influential hostesses maintain their salons year-round. The wives of cabinet ministers, senior naval officers, bankers, they gather regularly, sharing information their husbands believe they don't understand. Edmund nodded slowly, comprehension dawning. And as the Perfect Duchess, Cecilia has entree to circles that would remain closed to either of us. Precisely, Diana confirmed. Lady Whitmore's weekly card party, for instance. The Admiral's wife never misses it, nor does the Countess of Shaftesbury, whose husband chairs the committee overseeing naval appropriations. I received an invitation to Lady Whitmore's gathering this very week, Cecilia recalled. I had planned to send my regrets, assuming we would return promptly to Aldermere. Perhaps a reconsideration is in order, Edmund suggested, a new respect evident in his voice. Thus began Cecilia's initiation into the clandestine world of intelligence and counterintelligence that operated beneath the glittering surface of London society. Over the following days, she divided her time between quiet consultations with Edmund and Diana at the Barrington offices and strategic appearances at select social functions where information might be gathered. At Lady Whitmore's card party, Cecilia positioned herself at a table with Mrs. Admiral Harrington, steering their conversation with subtle skill toward maritime matters while appearing to focus on the game at hand. My husband mentions that your estate at Aldermere has a particularly fine view of the Channel, Mrs. Harrington remarked as she sorted her cards. He quite envied it during his last visit to the area. Indeed, on clear days we can see the naval patrols quite distinctly, Cecilia replied casually, though I understand they may soon be redeployed eastward. At least, so I gathered from Lord Shaftesbury's comments at dinner last week. Mrs. Harrington's eyes flickered briefly. How curious. My husband indicated precisely the opposite, a strengthening of the Western approaches. But perhaps plans have changed since we last spoke. She played her card with perhaps more force than necessary. The Admiralty adjusts its strategies daily in these uncertain times. This seemingly innocent exchange, when reported back to Edmund and Diana, confirmed their suspicions of divided counsel within the Admiralty itself, some officers aware of French plans and preparing accordingly, others deliberately misinformed, perhaps by the very agent they sought to identify. You have a remarkable talent for this work, Diana observed with genuine admiration after Cecilia recounted the conversation. The ability to extract information, while appearing merely to engage in polite conversation, is rare indeed. Years of navigating society have their uses, it seems, Cecilia replied with a small smile. Though I confess, I never imagined applying those skills to matters of national security. As they worked together over the following weeks, Cecilia found her initial wariness of Diana Barrington transforming into reluctant respect, then genuine admiration. The widow was formidably intelligent, unfailingly professional, and possessed of a dry wit that emerged in their private consultations. More surprising still was the evolution of her relationship with Edmund. Working together toward a common purpose seemed to accelerate the cautious rapprochement that had begun at Aldermere. Each day brought new discoveries about her husband, his strategic brilliance, his unwavering loyalty to those he trusted, his capacity for self-deprecating humor when among those few who truly knew him. One evening in mid-October, as they returned to Grosvenor Square after a particularly productive day, Edmund turned to Cecilia with unexpected directness. "You've surprised me," he admitted, as their carriage rolled through the darkening streets. "Your adaptability, your insight, your courage. I knew you possessed grace and dignity, but these other qualities—" "You never looked closely enough to see them," Cecilia replied without rancor. "Just as I failed to recognize the depth of purpose behind your seeming indifference." Edmund's hand found hers in the dimness of the carriage. "We have both been guilty of seeing only the surface, perhaps." His touch sent a tremor of awareness through Cecilia, a reminder that beneath their newfound professional respect lay another dimension of marriage entirely, one they had barely begun to explore. As if sensing her thoughts, Edmund gently released her hand as the carriage drew up before their residence. "Diana believes we are close to identifying the French agent," he said, his tone shifting to business. "The evidence points increasingly towards someone within the banking community, possibly Harrington's own financial advisor." "Rothwell?" Cecilia asked, recalling the taciturn gentleman who had accompanied the Admiral to several social functions. "He seemed excessively interested in my conversation with Lady Shaftesbury about the East India Company's latest dividend reports." "Precisely. We need confirmation before acting, however. The consequences of a false accusation would be severe." The opportunity for such confirmation came sooner than expected. 2 days later, an invitation arrived for the Duchess of Westfield to attend a small dinner party at the home of Lord and Lady Harrington in honor of several distinguished naval officers newly returned from the West Indies. "This is providential," Diana declared when Cecilia shared the news during their morning meeting. "Rothwell will certainly be present, as he manages the Admiral's personal investments, as well as advising on naval financial matters. If Rothwell is indeed our French agent, he'll be alert to any obvious scrutiny," Edmund cautioned. "We must proceed with extreme care." A plan was devised whereby Cecilia would engage Rothwell in conversation about certain shipping investments. Specifically, vessels whose schedules and routes were classified information, but which had recently been targeted with suspicious precision by French privateers. The evening of the dinner found Cecilia attired in a gown of sapphire blue silk that complemented her eyes and emphasized her status as the Duchess of Westfield. Edmund, resplendent in formal evening attire, escorted her into the Harringtons' residence with proud solicitude that was only partly for show. "The Duke and Duchess of Westfield," announced the butler as they entered the drawing-room where guests had gathered before dinner. Admiral Harrington, a robust man with weather-beaten features and direct blue eyes, greeted them warmly. "Your Grace, delighted you could join us. And Westfield, didn't expect to see you tonight. Thought you'd still be in the country." "London business required my attention," Edmund replied smoothly. "I could hardly allow the Duchess to attend without me when I learned of your distinguished guests." Introductions followed. Naval officers with tales of Caribbean engagements, political figures with connections to the Admiralty, and various society fixtures whose presence lent the gathering appropriate luster. Among them, as anticipated, stood Howard Rothwell, financial advisor to half the naval establishment and several prominent banking houses. "Your Grace," Rothwell bowed to Cecilia, his manner impeccably correct. "Your reputation for grace and discernment precedes you. I trust Aldermere continues to flourish under your stewardship?" "Most kindly, Mr. Rothwell," Cecilia replied with a warm smile calculated to put him at ease. "Though I confess, the management of such an estate involves financial complexities I find occasionally challenging. Perhaps I might impose upon your expertise later this evening. I understand from Lady Harrington that there are few minds sharper than yours when it comes to investment matters." Rothwell preened visibly at the flattery. "It would be my honor, Your Grace. Always delighted to be of service to a lady of such discernment." As they moved into dinner, Cecilia noted with satisfaction that she had been seated at some distance from Edmund, a fortunate arrangement that would allow them to observe different conversations and compare notes later. Even more fortuitously, Rothwell was placed directly opposite her, with Lady Harrington between them at the round table. Throughout the soup and fish courses, Cecilia engaged in general pleasantries with her dining companions, careful to present herself as charming, but not particularly informed on weighty matters. By the time the main course was served, a magnificent saddle of venison with appropriate accompaniments, Rothwell had visibly relaxed his guard, clearly categorizing her as a decorative society hostess rather than a woman of substance. It was during the dessert course, a particularly fine trifle that had the naval officers competing for seconds, that Cecilia made her calculated move. "Mr. Rothwell," she inquired innocently, "I wonder if you might advise me on a small investment matter. The Duke has granted me a modest sum to manage independently, and I confess I am torn between the conventional wisdom of land purchase and the potentially greater returns of maritime ventures." Rothwell dabbed his lips with his napkin, clearly flattered by the request. "A thoughtful dilemma, Your Grace. While land will always hold its value, certain shipping opportunities currently offer exceptional returns, particularly vessels trading with our colonies in the West Indies." "How fascinating," Cecilia replied, her expression one of earnest interest. "I had heard something similar from Lady Carrington last week. She mentioned her husband had invested heavily in the Mercury fleet, though I gather their sailing schedules have recently become somewhat erratic." The Mercury vessels were, in fact, naval supply ships disguised as merchant vessels, information known only to the Admiralty and their closest advisors. Any knowledge of their true schedules would indicate access to classified information. Rothwell's expression flickered momentarily before smoothing into practiced blandness. "The Mercury line. Yes, I believe they've had some navigational challenges of late, changed their routes quite significantly as I understand it." "Indeed?" Cecilia maintained her air of innocent inquiry. "How curious. Lord Carrington seemed quite confident they would maintain their original course, through the Southern Passage and directly to Barbados, I believe he said. This was a deliberate falsification. The Mercury ships had been secretly rerouted to approach Barbados from the north, a fact known only to the highest naval authorities." "Well, Lady Carrington may have misunderstood her husband," Rothwell replied, a hint of condescension entering his tone. "These matters are often confused in the retelling, particularly by ladies unfamiliar with maritime affairs." "Perhaps you're right," Cecilia conceded with a self-deprecating smile. "Though I could have sworn Lord Carrington mentioned a specific date, the 15th of November, for their arrival. Something about a particularly valuable cargo of— what was it? Oh yes, medical supplies and specialized equipment." The trap was set. The 15th was indeed the scheduled arrival date, but the cargo was munitions, not medical supplies. If Rothwell corrected her on the cargo but confirmed the date, it would suggest he had access to the legitimate schedule. If he attempted to misdirect her on the date, while seeming to know the true nature of the cargo, It would strongly indicate he was passing false information to the French. Rothwell's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Medical supplies? That is, I believe the Mercury vessels typically carry a variety of cargoes, though I couldn't speak to specific sailing dates, of course. He forced a chuckle. Such operational details are hardly the province of financial advisors. But there had been a telling hesitation, a moment when calculation had visibly crossed his features as he decided how to respond. More damning still was the slight flush that had crept up his neck, betraying his discomfort with the unexpected line of questioning. Cecilia nodded pleasantly and allowed the conversation to drift to other topics. But she had seen enough. Rothwell knew more than he should about the Mercury ships, had reacted to her mention of the correct date, and most tellingly, had not corrected her deliberate error about the cargo. Later that evening, as their carriage carried them back to Grosvenor Square, Cecilia related the exchange to Edmund in precise detail. "You're certain about his reaction?" Edmund pressed, his expression intent. "The exact sequence of his response is crucial." "Absolutely certain," Cecilia confirmed. He knew the date was accurate, but chose not to confirm it, and he deliberately avoided correcting my error about the cargo, which he would have done if he had legitimate access to the information. A true financial advisor with appropriate clearance would have known the cargo was munitions, not medical supplies. Edmund sat back, satisfaction evident in his posture. This, combined with Diana's intelligence from her sources in Paris, provides the confirmation we needed. Rothwell has been passing naval schedules to the French for months, just selectively enough to avoid detection, but with devastating effect on our shipping. "What happens now?" Cecilia asked. "Now," Edmund replied grimly, "we take our evidence to Lord Liverpool. As Home Secretary, he has the authority to order Rothwell's arrest and interrogation. With luck, we can force him to reveal his French contacts before word reaches them that he has been compromised." Events moved swiftly after that night. Within 3 days, Howard Rothwell was quietly taken into custody at his club, the evidence against him presented to a closed tribunal of Privy Councillors. Under intensive questioning, he revealed a network of French agents operating throughout London's financial district. Information that would allow British intelligence to feed false information back through these same channels in the crucial weeks before Napoleon's planned naval offensive. For their part in uncovering the plot, Edmund and Diana received private commendations from the highest levels of government, acknowledgements that would never appear in any public record, but which solidified their positions within the shadow world of international finance and intelligence gathering. More significant to Cecilia, however, was the transformation in her relationship with Edmund. The mutual respect forged in their joint endeavour had created a foundation of trust that transcended their earlier misunderstandings. They had seen each other at their best, Edmund's strategic brilliance complemented by Cecilia's social acumen, her intuitive understanding of human nature, balanced by his analytical precision. One evening in late October, as they sat together in the library of their London home reviewing correspondence from Aldermere, Edmund set aside his papers with deliberate care. "I think it's time we return to the country," he said thoughtfully. "The situation here is well in hand and winter will soon make travel more challenging." Cecilia nodded agreement. "The estate should be prepared for the colder months, and I confess I miss the peace of Aldermere after these weeks of intrigue." "As do I." Edmund hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty in his manner. "Before we depart, however, there is something I wish to discuss with you, something I have been considering for some time." Cecilia set aside her own letters, giving him her full attention. "I'm listening." Edmund rose, moving to stand before the fireplace, his tall figure silhouetted against the dancing flames. "Our marriage began as a contract, a practical arrangement designed to meet specific needs. You have fulfilled your part of that bargain with a grace and dignity that has earned you the admiration of all society." He turned to face her directly. "What I did not anticipate was how thoroughly you would exceed those terms, how completely you would transform not only Aldermere, but my understanding of what a true partnership might entail." Cecilia's heart quickened at the earnestness in his voice, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "These past weeks have shown me what we might accomplish together when acting as true allies. Your intelligence, your perception, your courage, these qualities were always present, though I was too blind to recognize them." He moved closer, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I find myself wondering what else I might discover about you, given the opportunity to truly know you as a husband should know his wife." The implication was unmistakable. Cecilia felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "Are you suggesting a new arrangement between us, Edmund?" "Not an arrangement," he corrected gently. "A marriage, in every sense of the word. Not because duty demands it, or because society expects it, but because I have come to desire it. To desire you, Cecilia, not as the perfect Duchess, but as the extraordinary woman I have finally allowed myself to see." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way Edmund had never permitted himself to be before. Cecilia rose from her chair, closing the distance between them until barely an arm's length separated their bodies. "You speak of desire," she said softly. "Is that all you feel, Edmund? Physical attraction now that you've deigned to notice me?" Edmund shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. "If it were merely that, this conversation would be simpler. No, what I feel is far more complex. Admiration, respect, gratitude for your patience with my many failings, and yes, desire too, a longing to know you in every way a man can know a woman." He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "I cannot promise that I have overcome all the scars of my past, or that I will never disappoint you, but I can promise to try, to be worthy of the second chance you have granted me, to build a true marriage between us day by day." Cecilia studied his face, the strong features she had come to know so well, the vulnerability in his eyes that he had never before allowed her to see. In that moment, she recognized the courage it had taken for this proud, wounded man to lay himself bare before her, to risk rejection after having armored himself against emotional pain for so many years. "I have never sought perfection in you, Edmund," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swelling within her. "Only honesty. Only the chance to be seen for who I truly am, rather than what function I might serve." His fingers tightened around hers. "And now? What do you seek now, Cecilia?" The question hung between them, freighted with possibility. Cecilia drew a deep breath, choosing her words with care. "I seek what any woman desires in marriage: partnership, respect, affection." She paused before adding quietly, "And yes, passion too. I have never experienced it, but I have come to believe it might be possible between us." Edmund's expression softened, wonder replacing uncertainty in his gaze. "Then let us return to Aldermere, not as Duke and Duchess performing our separate roles, but as husband and wife discovering what we might become together." As their carriage rolled through the iron gates of Aldermere House a week later, autumn sunlight gilding the stone facade with warm light, Cecilia felt a sense of homecoming deeper than any she had known before. The familiar building no longer represented a gilded cage or an elegant stage upon which to perform her duties. It had become somehow truly her home, a place where she was known, valued, even desired. That evening, after dinner in the small dining room where they had shared so many meaningful conversations, Edmund escorted Cecilia not to the door of her separate chambers, as had been their custom, but to his own suite of rooms. "I had these prepared for your inspection," he explained as he opened the door to reveal the transformed space. "If they meet with your approval." Cecilia stepped inside, amazement spreading through her at the changes. Gone was the austere masculine decor that had previously characterized Edmund's private retreat. In its place stood an elegant arrangement of connected chambers, a sitting room with comfortable furnishings for two, a dressing area with ample space for her belongings and beyond. Visible through an open doorway, the Duke's bedchamber, now furnished with a magnificent new bed large enough to accommodate two people comfortably. "You've been planning this," she realized, turning to find Edmund watching her reaction with hopeful intensity. "Since before we left for London," he admitted, "though I was uncertain whether you would, that is, whether we would reach a point where—" He faltered, uncharacteristically tongue-tied. Cecilia felt a surge of tenderness at his uncertainty. This powerful man, accustomed to commanding every situation, rendered hesitant by the prospect of true intimacy. "They're perfect," she assured him, moving closer. "But are you certain, Edmund, once we take this step?" "I have never been more certain of anything," he replied, his voice dropping to a lower register that sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. "The question is whether you are equally sure. I would wait if you need more time." Cecilia considered his words, searching her own heart for any lingering doubts or reservations. She found none, only a deep certainty that this was right, that they had earned this moment through honesty, respect, and the patient building of trust. "I am sure," she answered simply, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingertips. "I have waited long enough to truly be your wife, Edmund. I would wait no longer." His arms encircled her then, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest as his lips found hers, in a kiss unlike any they had shared before, tender yet hungry, restrained yet promising depths of passion as yet unexplored. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Edmund rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered. "Let me show you what true marriage can be between a man and woman who choose each other freely." "Yes," Cecilia breathed, her heart racing with anticipation and newfound courage. "Yes, Edmund, tonight and all the nights to come." Spring 1804. The gardens of Aldermere House blazed with colour as daffodils, tulips and early roses competed for attention beneath a cloudless April sky. In the newly renovated east wing, sunlight streamed through enlarged windows into a bright nursery where Cecilia, Duchess of Westfield, sat in a comfortable chair, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "There, there, little one," she murmured to the infant who regarded her with solemn blue eyes. "Your father will return soon. He's merely gone to fetch your grandmother from the carriage." As if summoned by her words, the nursery door opened to admit Edmund, his face alight with pride as he escorted an elegant older woman into the room. "Mother," Cecilia smiled warmly, "welcome to Aldermere. I'm so pleased you could come for the christening." Lady Eleanor Clarendon moved forward eagerly, her gaze fixed on her first grandchild. "My darling girl, let me see this precious boy properly." Cecilia carefully transferred the infant to his grandmother's waiting arms, watching with contentment as Lady Eleanor cooed and marvelled over the child's perfect features. "He has your eyes, Cecilia, but Edmund's chin, I think. Oh, he's magnificent." She looked up at them both, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Have you settled on a name?" Edmund moved to stand behind Cecilia's chair, his hand resting warmly on her shoulder. "We have. He will be Henry Edmund Carlyle, after both our fathers." "A fine, strong name," Lady Eleanor approved. "Your father would be so proud, Cecilia, as am I." She returned her attention to the baby, who had wrapped his tiny fingers around one of hers with surprising strength. Later, after Lady Eleanor had retired to rest before dinner, Edmund and Cecilia stood together by the nursery window, watching as their son slept peacefully in his elegant cradle, a gift from Lady Victoria, who had appointed herself the child's honorary great-aunt and most devoted champion. "He's perfect," Edmund murmured, his arm around Cecilia's waist, drawing her against his side. "As is his mother." Cecilia leaned into his embrace, contentment washing through her. "Hardly perfect, merely fortunate beyond measure." The year since their return to Aldermere had brought changes neither could have imagined during those early, barren months of their marriage. The renovations to the East Wing had transformed the family apartments into light-filled, comfortable spaces that bore Cecilia's imprint in every detail. The estate flourished under their joint stewardship, with Edmund focusing on agricultural improvements, while Cecilia continued her social initiatives in the surrounding villages. Most significant, however, was the transformation in their personal relationship. The trust established during their London adventure had deepened into genuine partnership, their complementary strengths creating a bond that transcended their initial practical arrangement. Edmund had proved himself a considerate and passionate husband, his earlier reserve giving way to an emotional openness that still sometimes surprised them both. For her part, Cecilia had discovered desires and capabilities within herself that might never have emerged had she remained merely the perfect Duchess performing her assigned role. When she had shared the news of her pregnancy the previous summer, Edmund's reaction had been everything she could have hoped for: joy mingled with protective concern, pride tempered by humility at the responsibility they now faced together. Throughout the months that followed, he had remained attentive to her changing needs, often working from Aldermere rather than London to remain by her side. He had even invited Diana Barrington to visit them at the estate, a gesture of transparency that had further cemented Cecilia's trust in their relationship. The birth of their son 2 months earlier had brought them even closer. Edmund's wonder at the new life they had created together, matched only by his admiration for Cecilia's strength during the difficult delivery. "What are you thinking?" Edmund asked now, drawing her from her reverie. Cecilia smiled up at him. "I was remembering our beginning, how differently we understood our marriage then, how little we knew of what was possible between us." Edmund's expression grew thoughtful. "I was so certain I knew what I wanted. A suitable duchess to maintain appearances while I pursued my ambitions, nothing more." He shook his head ruefully. "I never imagined that in gaining a true partner I would find everything I never knew I needed." "Nor I," Cecilia admitted. The quiet country girl who dreamed of a love match while accepting a marriage of convenience, who could have predicted she would find fulfillment in becoming not just a wife and mother, but a co-conspirator in matters of national importance. For their work with Diana had continued, albeit at a distance since the birth of their son. Edmund travelled to London when necessary, but many matters could be conducted through secure correspondence, with Cecilia often contributing insights gleaned from her extensive social connections. "Speaking of which," Edmund said, his tone shifting slightly, "I received a letter from Diana this morning. Lord Liverpool has requested our presence in London next month, a matter regarding French activities in the Baltic that apparently requires our particular expertise." Cecilia considered this. "The christening is next week, and Henry will be 3 months old by then. Perhaps it's time he was introduced to society, and to his godmother." For they had asked Diana to stand as godmother to their son, a decision that had raised eyebrows among those who knew only the public version of their association, but which felt entirely fitting to those who understood the truth. "Are you certain you're ready to return to London?" Edmund asked, his concern evident. "There's no urgency that would prevent Diana from handling matters alone for a few more months." Cecilia appreciated his consideration, but shook her head. "I am well recovered, and I confess I miss the stimulation of our work together. Besides," she added with a smile, "I believe it's important for Henry to understand from the beginning that his mother is more than merely a decorative accessory to his father's life." Edmund laughed softly. "No one who knows you could ever make that mistake, my love. Very well, we shall go to London after the christening. The Perfect Duchess and her imperfect Duke shall once again take society by storm." "Not perfect," Cecilia corrected him gently. "Simply complete, as I believe we were always meant to be had we only the wisdom to recognize it sooner." As if in agreement, little Henry stirred in his cradle, his tiny face crinkling momentarily before relaxing back into peaceful slumber, secure in the knowledge, however unconscious, that he was surrounded by love born not of duty or convention, but of genuine understanding and respect between his parents. Edmund drew Cecilia closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I may have married you by duty," he murmured, "but I remain with you by choice. Every day a choice I make with gratitude for the woman who refused to be ignored." "And I choose you," Cecilia replied softly, "not for your title or position, but for the man I have come to know and love, flaws, strengths, and all." Outside the nursery windows, spring sunshine bathed the gardens of Aldermere in golden light, promising new growth, new possibilities, new beginnings. Within, the Duke and Duchess of Westfield stood united, no longer strangers bound by convenience, but partners joined in purpose, passion, and the quiet certainty that what they had built together was far more precious than either could have achieved alone. The end. Dear listener, in the quiet moments when this story settles into your heart, I invite you to see yourself reflected not in the grand halls of Aldermere, but in the journey itself. For life at 60 and beyond carries a richness that Edmund and Cecilia only began to discover, the profound beauty of second chances. Your path has wound through decades of sunshine and shadow. You've weathered storms that would have broken younger souls. You've seen promises kept and broken, felt the weight of choices made and opportunities missed. And yet, here you stand, magnificent in your resilience. What Edmund learned in months you've gathered over a lifetime, that vulnerability is not weakness, but the deepest form of courage. That pride may shield us from pain, but also blinds us to joy. That recognition, truly seeing and being seen, is perhaps the greatest gift we can give one another. Tonight, as you rest your head, know that your heart, like Edmund's, may carry scars, but those scars have not diminished your capacity for warmth, for wonder, for renewal. Tomorrow brings not just another day, but another chance to unlock rooms in your life that have remained closed, to throw open windows and let light stream in, to recognize, as Cecilia did, that your worth isn't measured by others' perception, but by the quiet certainty of your own spirit. May you sleep tonight embraced by this truth. It is never too late to paint, to dance, to love, to forgive, especially yourself. The most beautiful transformations often happen when the world tells us our season has passed. But you know better. Your season is now, always now. And when morning comes, may you rise with the gentle power of someone who understands that the most profound strength comes not from never falling, but from rising again and again with grace, with purpose, with an open heart. Your story continues, and it remains, as it has always been, extraordinary. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall team. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your encouragement, truly from the bottom of our hearts, is what motivates us to keep telling stories filled with love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. At the end of this video, you'll see another suggestion from our channel. Click it to be surprised by yet another unforgettable and emotional tale. Thank you for being here. Legends of the Fall team.